Hey YouTube, this is Tom at TM Aquatics, and I hope everyone's doing great. Some of the most frequent questions that I receive here at TM Aquatics is in regards to how I set up a Pleco tank. Now, if you watched my recent fish room tour, I'll go ahead and drop a link up above. Be sure to check that out at the end of this video. But if you watch that fish room tour, you're going to notice that all the Pleco tanks here at TM Aquatics are set up very similar. And in today's video, I thought I'd do a little deeper dive into my basic Pleco tank setup, which is going to include filtration, sponge filters, caves, substrate material, all of that. And that's what today's video is going to be about, and hopefully I'll be able to answer a bunch of questions that people may have. Anyways, I do hope you stick around and check this one out. Alright YouTube, we're going to start this video off by taking a quick stroll through the fish room, and we're going to look at some Pleco tanks of various sizes here at TM Aquatics. But pay attention and take notice to what is actually inside each one of these tanks and how they're set up. You're going to see something very similar with each one, whether it's a 75 gallon or a 60 breeder, or perhaps a 40 breeder, or maybe a 33 long, a 55, or a 40 long, or again 40 breeders. All of these tanks are set up very similar to each other. So I guess we'll go ahead and we'll choose this tank right here and just do a deep dive, close look at everything that goes into this tank. Now let's start out with the substrate. Each one of my Pleco tanks has the same substrate in it, and it's the substrate that I prefer. This is a pool filter sand that I buy at Menards in 50-pound bags, and it costs around $10 per bag. But I like it for a few reasons, or a couple reasons. Number one, it's readily available. I've got a Menards fairly close to my house, so it's easy to grab a couple bags when I need it. It's usually very clean. Very little dust comes off that substrate when I wash it. But I also like the grain size. Some pool filter sand is so small it's almost like a powder or a dust, and that stuff can get kicked up into your water column when you're doing water changes, or when the fish, are trying to clear a space under a rock or scurrying about in the fish tank, and that stuff can get pulled into your power filters if you have them on the tank and damage or destroy your impellers. But the pool filter sand from Menards, the grain size is too large for that. I never have any floating through the water column. The grain is too big, they're too heavy, and they stay nice and settled on the bottom where they belong. So that's the substrate that I choose to buy, is the pool filter sand from Menards for, again, about 10 bucks for a 50-pound bag. Now, I also get asked about caves. Now, what size cave you need obviously is going to be determined by what type of Pleco you have. Obviously, if you're keeping big cactus Plecos, you're going to need something much bigger than a zebra Pleco, right? But here at TM Aquatics, I'm keeping fish that usually are in the 3 to 5 inch range. L134s, 494s, 397s, L46s, 236s, 174s, 471s, 181s, 183s, etc. My favorite size cave is the 1.5 inch D cave from plecocaves.com. That's one of my favorite, and they come in a various different colors: red, light brown, dark brown, and like a white speckled. But I like that cave because that particular cave is the cave size and shape that I have had more spawns in my fish room come from than any other size or any other shape cave. Now, with that being said, I do have some fish that prefer square caves, round caves, the Euro D cave right there, the standard D cave right there. So I always suggest and recommend that you offer various shapes and sizes and let your fish choose the one that they like best. So here we are back at this 40-gallon breeder. This is a L134 tank. I do get asked quite a bit, what are you using to stack the caves on each other? What is that? Well, I have a few different things that I use here in my fish room. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at each one of these things and some of the different material that I use to stack the caves. So here's a couple different pieces of material that I use when I stack the caves. This here is a natural slate tile. I used to buy these at Menards, and this I believe is a 6-inch by 16-inch tile, and I believe these used to run $2 or $3 a piece. However, Menards isn't currently carrying this product anymore. Now, Home Depot does carry, I believe, a 1 foot by 2 foot tile for just a few bucks, $4 or $5 a piece. And if you have a tile saw, you can easily cut whatever size you want from that larger piece. But I have moved away from the slate tiles, and I've started picking up this stuff here. Just a flat, it's not slate. I don't know what the material is, but I have found that it does not alter the pH of the tank, so it's an inert material. But I'm picking this up from one of my local garden centers for 49 cents a pound, and I just like the more natural look that it has with the rough edges and the different shapes. It just allows me to be a little more creative in the setup and make it appear a little more natural. But those are two of the materials that I'm using, and let's go take a look at one other piece that I use to stack caves with. In these 240 breeders over here, you might notice there's a real long tile on the bottom and then in the middle. And same thing up here. Now these tiles I also picked up from Menards. They're just a ceramic tile, and they have like a faux wood pattern on them. They do come, oh actually no, these came from Home Depot. My apologies. These come from Home Depot, and they're like $2 a piece or $3 a piece. And again, I think they're like 6 by 20 or 6 by 22 or 6 by 24. You know, the exact dimensions escapes me right now, but these work extremely well. And as you can see, they fit when you're stacking in a 40 breeder. They fit real well, because you do want to leave some areas on the sides, in the front. You want to leave some open areas for the fish to come down and swim around and feed and graze. So these work really nice with 40 breeders. And again, they're just a ceramic tile that you can find at your local home center. These come from Home Depot. And again, they only run a couple bucks. Alright, so let's talk about filtration. In each one of my Pleco tanks, I have at least 2, or sometimes I have 3 sponge filters. I use 2 different types of sponge filters here in my fish room. I have these very, very common, no-name Chinese imported filters that you find on eBay. They're relatively inexpensive at maybe $5 or $6 a piece. And then I have a bunch of Hydro Pros. Let's go check one of those out. And that filter right there is a Hydro Pro size 4. And I have both size 4 and size 5 here in my fish room. I'd have to say though, between the two, I do prefer the Hydro Pros a little bit better. The pore size is a little bit larger. They don't get clogged as quickly, but the pore sizes aren't so large that when you touch the filter, a whole bunch of stuff comes out. If you do get the Hydros, make sure you get the Hydro Pros. The regular Hydro sponge filters, the pore sizes are so small, get clogged real easy, and I found that that material that the sponge is made from breaks down a lot faster than the Hydro Pros. So the Hydro Pros only cost about another $1 or so, but they're definitely worth it. You can pick up Hydro Pro sponge filters at Ken's Fish. You can also buy them from Gemco. But these are my favorite sponge filters that I have here in the fish room, and I'll eventually replace all of the the no-name Chinese-made eBay sponge filters with the Hydro Pros. As time goes, I've been slowly converting, but you know, when you're buying 30, 40 sponge filters, you know, it can get a little expensive. But those are the two types of sponge filters that I use here in my fish room at TM Aquatics. And again, at least 2 sponge filters in each tank. Sometimes I have 3, just depends on the tank and the size. Now, in addition to sponge filters, on every Pleco tank I have here at TM Aquatics, I have a power filter. The most common power filter that I currently have in my fish room is an AquaClear 70. And why the AquaClear 70 and why do I have power filters when I have central air in my fish room? And I'm using the lesser expensive, very budget-friendly sponge filters. Well, I want a little filtration, diversity, and redundancy. What happens if my linear air piston pump goes out and I don't have, you know, any other filtration on the tank? That wouldn't be good. I want additional filtration. I want a secondary filtration source. That's why I have power filters on each one of these tanks. Now there's a couple other benefits of having a power filter on your tank. Number one, it adds a little bit of water movement and additional current. And Plecos like that. Most Plecos enjoy a little bit of water movement, but it also helps keep the tanks a lot cleaner. That little extra water movement does wonders for stirring up the substrate and keeping all the poo suspended in the water column where the filters, the power filters, can do what they do and pull all that stuff out of the tank. So if you look at my Pleco tanks closely through that Pleco tour, you're not going to see a lot of detritus and a lot of poo sitting on the bottom. You might see some, but you're not going to see a lot. So they just add additional water movement. They help keep the substrate clean. They add a secondary source of filtration. And these AquaClear 70s at only 6 watts of power, what's that cost to run annually? 15 bucks? You know, for me, it's definitely worth it for the added peace of mind. Now we're going to pan over here to the right real quick. And on these tanks here, these 60 breeders, I have started using the Seachem titles. And right now, I'm starting to lean more towards the titles simply because in the event of a power outage, these are self-priming and I never have an issue with these things restarting. When I'm doing water changes and I drop the water level 50%, sometimes these AquaClears need a little bit of help getting started back up. Where the Seachem titles, never have to touch them. So I'll probably be moving away from the AquaClears and start going with the Seachem titles as filters need to be replaced. And again, the power draw on these is extremely low. I forget what they are. I was going to say 4 watts, but I think it might be a little bit more than that. If anybody knows, they can go ahead and post down below. But I definitely like having power filters on each one of my Pleco tanks in addition to the sponge filters. On every power filter operating here at TM Aquatics, I have a pre-filter. Whether it's an AquaClear 70 or a Seachem Tidal, I use a pre-filter on the intake tubes. If you're not doing that, you should, because it really extends the time necessary to go in and do full maintenance on that power filter. You'll be glad you did, trust me. These things are real easy to slip off the intake tube, give them a quick rinse. You'll be surprised at how much stuff comes out of these things. Slip it back on the intake tube when it's nice and clean. You can go a couple months, 2 months, 3 months sometimes between servicing your power filters when you're using these pre-filters. So I do use pre-filters on every power filter here at TM Aquatics. Now also in some of my larger Pleco tanks, especially tanks that are 4 foot and then the 120 gallon tank out in the rec room that's a 5 foot tank, I do like to add some additional wave makers or power heads just for an added water movement. And they do such a wonderful job just helping the tank stay much cleaner than they would otherwise. If you don't have these in like a 4 foot tank and you have, like on this tank, the power filters over here on the right side, the left side you're going to get a bunch of detritus and stuff collecting back here in the left corner. And by having an additional wave maker or power head in the tank, again, it just helps keep it real clean, which is important to having healthy plecos. You definitely want to keep the bottom substrate as clean as possible. Alright, so as far as other equipment, in my Pleco tanks, all of my Pleco tanks have Eheim heaters. I don't have any other brand in my fish room at this time except in some 20-gallon grow outs where I have some preset 78-degree type heaters from Aquarium. Otherwise, each one of my Pleco tanks has an Eheim heater. And why Eheim? Well, any brand or every brand of heater is going to fail at some point, but I have had fewer Eheims fail on me than other brands, period. Cobalt Aquatics will never see my fish room again. Aquarium Pros will never see my fish room again. I've had fewer failures with Eheim heaters than any other brand out there. The other reason I like Eheim heaters is I can use a smaller or a lower wattage heater to heat the size tanks that I have. In other words, these 40-gallon breeders, I use 125 watt Eheim heaters. What does every other brand recommend that you use to heat a 40-gallon breeder? They recommend a 150-gallon heater. So I can use a smaller heater to heat the same size tank. I have fewer problems with them. They're easy to source. They're inexpensive. That's the heater of choice here at TM Aquatics, is the Eheim. I also use heater controllers on every single Pleco tank here in the fish room, again just for some redundancy, an added layer of protection. In the rare event that you do have a heater malfunction, these Inkbird heater controllers are going to shut that heater down. They're going to save your fish, and they have an audible alarm that lets you know that the fish tank is outside of its set water parameters or water temperatures, so you can take appropriate measures and do what you got to do to take care of the fish. But I do have a heater controller on every single Pleco tank here in my fish room. Alright folks, when it comes to lighting, use whatever lighting you have available on hand. Don't go out and spend a bunch of money on new lights for Pleco tanks. As I mentioned, I don't even keep lights on the Pleco tanks 90+% of the time. But just look at these tanks here and over here. On these two new 40 breeders, I have aquanites up above them. On this 60 breeder here, I have a beams work. Down here on this tank, I have a Hygger light. Down here on this bottom, there's a 4-foot LED shop light mounted underneath the rack there above the tanks. Over here on this tank, there's a suspended shop light I picked up from Sam's or Costco's. Bottom line is, you don't need to go out and spend a whole bunch of money on a bunch of fancy lighting. And as I mentioned earlier, 90% of the time, all the lights on the Pleco tanks back here, except those tanks that have ditherfish and plants, the lights are off. Alright, and finally, one thing that I put in every one of my Pleco tanks, whether it's a Hypancistris, Picoltia, Panaculus, I put a piece of wood in there. It's not just for aesthetics. I have found that most Plecos enjoy rasping biofilm off of wood, so I do put a piece of driftwood in each one of my tanks. And the type of wood that is in most of my tanks is Malaysian driftwood. And why Malaysian driftwood? Well, because it's very heavy, very dense. You don't need to weigh it down with anything. It sinks on its own. And it really doesn't break down like some of the softer woods that last forever. But I do have a piece of driftwood in each one of my Pleco tanks. Alright YouTube, well there you have it. Basic Pleco tank setup here at TM Aquatics. Pretty straightforward, very basic. Now, everything that I shared here is based on my personal opinion and preference based on my experience and different brands that I've tried, etc. You may have a different brand heater that works better for you. You might have a different power filter that you like, or you may have a different sponge filter that you prefer. That's okay. The purpose of today's video was just to show and share what a basic Pleco tank setup is like here at TM Aquatics. The equipment that I use, the substrate, the stacking material, the aquascape material, all that, just to answer some questions that people have been bringing to me. So anyways, I do appreciate each and every one of you taking time out of your day to watch one of my videos. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them down below. I'll do my best to respond when time allows. And as always, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up. And if you think I earned your subscription, hit the subscribe button. And I'd be honored to have you on this TM Aquatics journey. Anyways, everyone take care. Have a fantastic evening. And until the next one, we'll catch you all later.